Hi, I'm Professor Elander, and today we are going to talk about objective language. So let's get started by talking about The Office. Personally, I think The Office is the best show on TV. It is fantastic, it is funny, it has a depth of emotion, but when I say the best show on TV, that leaves it up to our opinions. Some of you might agree with me, some of you might hate the show. So by saying it's the best show on TV, that's a subjective statement. I'm basing that off my personal opinion and my reception of the show. When we're writing essays, that's not good. We want to have objective language. Something stronger, a better argument would be The Office is the most popular show on Netflix, or that it has 52 million minutes of streaming time, which is significantly more than any other show on the platform. These things are based on facts and logic, therefore stronger arguments to support throughout an essay. When we're writing, using objective language based off these facts, is really important. It matters a lot. It's important because it shows that we are impartial, we're not using personal, judgmental, or emotive language, and instead we're using fair and accurate reporting. It avoids exaggeration, it avoids bias, and it shows respect for people who may disagree with you. To be objective in writing means that we're exploring the curiosity of a subject instead of having preset opinions. It's giving us a way to engage with data, with research, instead of just presenting our personal preferences as we start. So a couple things I want to go over before we really get into objective or subjective. And then later into popular sources. First, what does objective mean? So objective is a way of talking about things, like I said, that does not show your personal feelings. We're making sure we're using measurable, quantifiable data based in scientific fact. We're not exaggerating or distorting numbers or opinions to make our point come across. Opposite of that would be bias. A lot of us have probably heard bias in the news. We talk about bias for all kinds of things: gender bias, bias in race, bias in hiring. But bias is all across in everything we do, whether we acknowledge it or not. Bias is just how we favor things, usually from a non-factual basis. So a bias can be something innate, like something just in us, like we have racial biases, or something learned or taught to you. So people can develop biases for or against individuals, against groups, or beliefs. For example, a lot of people have a bias against rap music. My mom is one of those people. I'm sure y'all have parents like that too. Every time I play a song with a beat in the background, it doesn't matter what is being said, they assume it's going to be something inappropriate because their bias is that rap music is aggressive or demeaning or vulgar. So for example, I have a song that's on one of my playlists called Nikes, and it says, running so fast you're going to kill someone. And my mom heard kill someone in that song and assumed it was talking about murdering people. But all is really talking about his shoes, because her bias is that rap music must be vulgar or violent, which isn't always the case, right? So looking at that was her bias towards music, which made her believe something before she really took thought to think about it. So when we're looking at bias, we think of things like prejudice, preference, or one-sidedness. A lot of times bias is negative, and we think of it as something detrimental, but bias is also just what we are born with and what we are rooted in our culture. So regardless of if it is negative or positive, bias is something that is ingrained in us without our choice, and it's something we need to be aware of. A lot of times people have a misunderstanding about bias, but really it's just anything that's not based off a fair or impartial view. It's what you like in something. So I could say something is, I have a bias for coffee over tea. It doesn't necessarily need to be a negative or hateful thing. It's just my personal preference. This all leads into the idea of objective versus subjective language. So when we're thinking about things that are objective in our writing, we want to be things that are not biased and aren't just based off our personal preferences and things that are not opinions or feelings, but instead are factual information that we can verify or prove. If we think back to The Office, I can't prove that it's the best TV show, but I can prove that it has the most views on Netflix. And I could talk about like critics' ratings, or I could talk about cost that was that is made post-production. All these things are data points that are clearly argued instead of something as subjective or opinion-based as the best show. At the end of the day, you can't prove what's the best because that's a meaningless statement. It's an opinion. So when we think of subjective, it's all the opposites of this. It's anti-factual, non-verifiable information. All right. So let's practice looking for information that is subjective or not objective language. So let's look at this paragraph about soccer. So Newcastle were so lucky at the game. The superb and skillful Manchester United players were beaten by the lucky, cheating Newcastle players. The referee was totally biased. He allowed 5 goals that were all offside. I've never seen so much luck and cheating. So looking at this paragraph alone, can you guess who this writer likes, or this announcer? My guess is that they would be a Manchester United player, because they're using all of these emotive languages or words based or elicit emotions instead of objective languages. So everything in here that is circled is subjective. So let's look. So lucky at the game. Superb and skillful to describe the Manchester players were beaten by the lucky and cheating. So we put up this dichotomy against the skillful and the non-skilled, when that's not an objective statement. We're not talking about points scored or athleticism. We're talking about opinions there. The referee was totally biased, and it was based off luck and cheating. None of these things are objective. You clearly understand who the writer is, or the speaker is on the side of, and that's not a clear or fair statement. This one's pretty obvious because the words are so strong and so anti-Newcastle. But let's look at some ones that are a little bit harder to find, or a little bit harder to see that they're subjective. So let's look at this bias statement, or subjective statement. Third grade boys are always disruptive, while the girls were always eager to please. So a big thing we want to focus on is that always and never are poor arguments across the board, because they're easily disproven. Hard evidence and facts are stronger tools to support this, as you'll see here. In a study of third graders, 35% of the boys and 68% of the girls were able to complete instructions for the assignments. So again, this isn't all boys. 35% is a third, 1 in every 3, and 68 is about 2 in every 3 girls. So neither one of these statements is correct in their analysis to start with. 2, when we're looking at this, it shows a higher authority because it's connecting to some kind of facts or study taken. It makes it more believable. It makes us trust it more than always or never. This is also a good argument to think about when you're fighting with people. It's really easy to prove, you never do this for me, because then all people are going to think of, well, I did it this time or that time, right? We want to come back to hard evidence. It makes our arguments or our position stronger. So another version of this might be, teachers never consider the amount of homework their student has before assigning a class project. Well, that may be the case for some teachers, but hopefully you don't have them. So a better statement would be, some teachers, even just getting around that that never statement, that absolute, you are changing this to be a more subjective or more objective statement from a subjective one, because some is easier to prove than others, or than never. In general, absolute statements, unless they're backed by data, are going to lead to poor arguments in subjective writing. Another tip for this is to acknowledge the bias you bring into a statement or into a writing. In a perfect world, we wouldn't be biased. We would all think logically and rationally all the time. However, we're people. We don't think that way. We're not machines. So we want to make sure that we're not just looking for data that proves our own perspectives. That's called confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is when I have an opinion and I only pull information that supports that instead of finding information that goes against it. When you're aware of what you're coming into the research with, or your opinion you're coming into a writing with, it can help you look for things that go against it and to lean into things that are challenging to you instead of going looking for the opposite. 3 tips to help you avoid confirmation bias is 1, pull away your pride. It's okay to not know anything or not know everything. Nobody knows everything, and it's okay to get information that conflicts with your current worldview. 2, seek out discomfort and opinions that challenge your own. Lean into that. Think about how it challenges you and see objectively whether you agree or disagree with their opinion. Don't start belittling and attacking them before you finish you finish reading their argument. And lastly, be thoughtful in your researching. If you Google bananas good for you, you're only going to get information about bananas good for you. Think about using objective language when you research and you're searching things on the internet so that you don't get biased sources. A better thing instead of bananas good for you might be banana nutritional facts. So we're doing all of this information about objective language to now think about popular sources. So popular sources are things that we read and listen to and watch every day. They're intended for general audience of readers and viewers and are written to entertain, inform, and persuade. Popular sources help you answer the who, what, when, where kind of questions about things and find essential information about them, usually about current events and issues. The downside of popular sources is they're not made for academic writing. So as we see, these are things like magazines or newspaper articles or the radio or documentaries, anything that's not made for an academic public. This is for everybody and everything. The reason popular sources benefit us is because they let everyone in on a basic knowledge. So you can come in if you know very little about a subject, and it should give you the background information you need to understand it. Usually they're also entertaining and easy to read, so you provide a lot of information informally, quickly. And lastly, they're a great entry point to a subject. So if you don't know a lot and you just want to get your feet wet, that's a great way to do it. It's through popular sources because they don't take a lot of knowledge base or have a lot of jargon to get into. The cost of this is that they're not written for experts, so they're not going to be peer-reviewed or fact-checked by scholars or experts in that area. Instead, where a scholarly source would reference other papers, explain their research, and cite their sources, a popular source will not do those things. And also, because it's a popular source, we don't know the credentials always of the author. In academic work, we have their university they're tied to as a professor, and it shows their scholarly work. But on an everyday popular source, we don't even know the author's background usually. And even if we do know their background, it usually isn't connected to the work itself. So if there's these major costs to popular source, what are some things you can do to clarify those or to avoid them? So when you're using a popular source, and even things like National Geographic or Reader's Digest or the newspaper, which are aimed at giving you information, are popular sources because they're not written by subject area experts. Subject or academic sources, scholarly sources, are going to be ones written by people in that area. So we want to make sure that if we're going to use popular sources, we're at least using ones that are good. There's a big difference between a gossip magazine or like the tabloid and the newspaper, right? If we always believed the tabloids, I think there was one that said they found living dinosaurs and had Jurassic Park, and that every celebrity in the whole world's getting divorced all the time. Those aren't very credible. However, when we're looking at the newspaper, we usually do have pretty good information from a wide variety of sources about current events, and that is usually trustworthy. So when we're looking at these, we want to start out by seeing which sources use objective language instead of emotion language, personal language, or opinionated language. They're also going to cite their sources and reference other works when they can. A lot of popular sources do this even if they don't have a full works cited page like secondary or scholarly sources do. They were written or updated recently. So we don't want to look about an article from 2 months ago if we have one written similarly about today's climate. That they are detailed and thorough in their explanation or analysis, that they offer counter views, and they give the details that matter. And also that they identify an author and you have an experienced author. So we're looking at popular sources, and we have a blog from a nobody in Middle America talking about chemistry. That may not be a good reference because we don't know what their background is. Versus if we're reading an article about a professor of chemistry at a major university. There's also another way for you to break down information called RADCAB. You don't need to know all of this information, but basically thinking about, is it reliable? Could you find this in another source? Is it sound reasonable? Who is the author? Do they have authority in the subject? Was it published soon to now or more recently? What was the date? Do they have citations or references? Who is the primary audience? And do they address the bias, or do they have a clear bias? Basically, if you come down to it, something sounds too good to be true. It probably is too good to be true. Great lesson to learn. But when we're evaluating popular sources, be careful about these two things. That you're having a reliable source, that is a well-meaning popular source, and that you're also checking your own bias. Good luck.